Good morning and welcome to this very special Penn Engineering event for our alumni in China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. My name is Brad Richards, Director of Alumni Relations here at the School of Engineering and Applied Science. It's wonderful to see so many alumni, current students, prospective students, and friends join us today. We have a terrific program for you, including a faculty panel from some of Penn Engineering's top researchers, an alumni panel, and some updates from the school. To get things started, I would like to introduce Penn Engineering's Nemirovsky Family Dean, Vijay Kumar. Dr. Kumar has been our Penn Engineering Dean for over 5 years, and he has held numerous leadership positions at the school, including Chair of the Department of Mechanical Engineering and Applied Mechanics, and Director of the General Robotics, Automation, Sensing and Perception, or GRASP Lab. So to kick things off today, Vijay, I would like to welcome you to the conversation. Hello, sir.
Thank you, Brad. Let me add to Brad's welcome, a warm welcome to all of you, alumni, current students, and friends. Thank you for joining us for this inaugural Penn China Technology Forum. I'm delighted to see so much interest in our forum. Every year I travel to Beijing, to Shanghai, Hong Kong, typically in March and sometimes again in June to see alumni. But of course, this is not a typical year. Indeed, it's like no other year. We're living a different reality this year, the reality that the coronavirus pandemic has created. But at least we're fortunate to be together in this virtual setting, however surreal it may seem to you. And there is a silver lining, and the silver lining is we're able to get together as a large group. Nobody had to wake up early in the morning and brave traffic. We were instantly at the meeting, something that's very difficult to do in our real world, but it's so natural in this surreal world. I did mention that I visit China every year, and I do this for 3 reasons. First, as the Dean of the Engineering School, if I ask which is the country with the largest alumni base for engineering students outside the US, it's China. Second, we get the best applicants from China. So these are 2 reasons. But the third one is it has to do with the innovation, the energy, especially tech innovation, which is exploding in China. I'm personally familiar with the Shenzhen, Dongguan, Hong Kong area, which attracts the same amount of talent, the same quality of talent as the Valley, but the volume is just much, much bigger. It's a $1 trillion tech economy with venture spending that rivals what we have in Silicon Valley. I like to think of Penn and China in 2 ways. The first question for us is, how can China come to Penn? And the second question is, how can Penn go to China? Well, how can China come to Penn? The answer is quite simple. We have students that come from China to Penn, very talented students that we appreciate as faculty. Second, we have collaborations with Chinese companies and Chinese universities, collaborations that we value. I think the second piece is a little more complicated. How can we get Penn to go to China? And this is one of the events we're conducting because we want to strengthen the Penn Engineering network in China. Indeed, we want to make China an important, perhaps even a mandatory part of our education for our students. Given that a big fraction of the world population lives in China, and of course Taiwan and Hong Kong, and given that it's the center of so much innovation, wouldn't it be appropriate for all engineering students to get some exposure to this? This is something that we believe in. And plus, of course, we want to do this through internships, through research collaborations. And to those of you who know Penn, it should not come as a surprise to you. Penn is a global institution. There are over 5,000 international students enrolled at Penn. And in fact, I often tell students, no matter what part of the world you come from, you'll find a support network from your country within the Penn campus. And it certainly is true for Chinese students at Penn. Now, this may seem hard for many of us to believe if we look at the political rhetoric that's coming out of Washington, D.C., which seems to be opposed to immigration. But I can assure you, having served in Washington, D.C., in the federal government, I can assure you that in the field of technology, actually that bias is not there. Why? Because even in the US, immigrants have a higher rate of entrepreneurship than US-born citizens. This is a fact. In fact, I often say if you randomly choose an entrepreneur in the US, the odds are that he or she was once an international student. And this is true of the CEOs of Google, CEO of Microsoft, CEO of Tesla, CEO of NVIDIA. They were all once international students. And so we at Penn really want to double down on building and strengthening connections with China, regardless of what might happen between the two governments. Indeed, at a time when I believe the governments are not doing the right thing, it's universities like ours, schools like ours that have to step up and intensify our efforts to build partnerships. So really, it's through a very optimistic lens that I view the state of our school and our partnership with China. Some of you students perhaps may be planning to come to Philadelphia this spring. I think it's only fair that I tell you a little bit about the state of the pandemic. We were talking about this before the event started. The first piece of good news is that regardless of what you hear in the rest of the country, the positivity rate on campus has been consistently around 1% to 2%, which is great news. In the spring term, starting the second week of January, we're ramping up to get the testing capacity up to 40,000 tests a week. These are screening tests, which are based on saliva-based screening technologies using a lot of robotics, with 8 testing sites across campus. Every undergraduate student will be tested twice a week and every graduate student once a week. And this is, of course, in addition to your traditional nasal PCR test for symptomatic and exposure testing. And I'm talking about testing, but of course, we also have the tools for contact tracing that have to go together with testing. So why am I saying all of this to you? Because I want to assure you that we are redoubling our efforts to make Penn a safe place for students. And I really do hope to see many of you on campus in the spring. So today's events will feature 4 of our star faculty in 4 different departments. Professor David Meany, who's the Senior Associate Dean for our school and also a professor in bioengineering. Professor Jing Li, who is a professor in electrical and systems engineering and computer information science. Professor Jiambo Shi, who's a professor in computer information science and expert in computer vision. And Professor Shu Yang, professor in material science and engineering. You'll get the opportunity to hear the latest and greatest in Penn Engineering innovation. And for you alums, you'll be pleased to know that the Penn Engineering School is expanding. It's expanding in 3 strategic areas. First is the intersection between engineering and the health sciences. Never before has this connection between engineering and the School of Medicine been so important. Second, in the area of data science, I think we can all agree that data science and the resulting technology is changing every facet of our lives. And then finally, in energy science and technology. This is an area that it behooves all of us to invest in if we want to save the planet at some future date. Indeed, we're planning to add 20 new positions in the next 4 years in our school and adding 2 new buildings to our campus by 2024. One of these buildings is in the area of data science and the other in the area of energy science and technology. So alums, I hope that you too one day will get a chance to visit us, but sometime soon, and experience the campus. It's very different than when you were on campus last. But let me stop here. My goal is to welcome you all to this event, which I've done. And my next goal is to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Amy Gadsden, who is our Associate Vice Provost for Global Initiatives. Dr. Gadsden works with all Penn schools, all of the 12 schools and centers, including engineering, to develop and implement strategies to increase Penn's global engagement, both on campus and overseas. She is particularly interested in China and is our executive director of Penn China Initiatives, which coordinates and develops university strategy and activity in China. This activity includes programming at the Penn Wharton China Center in Beijing and the Penn China Research and Engagement Fund, which brings a lot of Penn scholars to China. She oversees both these efforts. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Amy Gadsden to our virtual podium.
Thank you, Vijay. It's such a pleasure to join you. Good evening, Philadelphia, to those of you in Philadelphia. Good morning to those of you in East Asia. I always enjoy when I visit the engineering quad at Penn. We often talk at the university about, a buzz on campus or energy on campus. But when you walk in the buildings in the engineering quad and in the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, you're literally talking about buzz and energy on the campus. And I miss that very visceral experience of, hearing all of the activity in the labs at Penn Engineering. It's my pleasure to join you for this great program today, and I won't speak for too long because I know the main event is really hearing from the faculty and alumni. But I wanted to say a little bit about the importance of our relationship with China and of Penn's commitment to China. This semester, for the first time, I taught an undergraduate course on the history of U.S.-China relations, the diplomatic relationship. And there are many, many topics that one needs to teach and focus on in teaching a course like that. There's trade, economics and finance, national security issues, multilateral engagement, science and technology, a whole host of issues. But when I taught the course this semester, I led with 3 units on the student-to-student exchange relationship, the history of student-to-student exchange. Student exchange, as so many of you know, has been a cornerstone of the US-China relationship for almost 200 years. There were dozens of graduates, including Penn graduates, who traveled to China in the mid-19th century, mainly as medical missionaries. And these were paralleled by students who came from China to the United States in the famous Chinese education mission of 1872. And then, of course, those exchanges grew and blossomed in through the turn of the century and into the beginning of the 20th century. Penn was home to some of China's most famous architects at that time, Liang Sicheng and Lin Huiyin among them. When the US and China resumed relations in the 1970s, students again became a key pillar upon which we built the US-China relationship. And that continues to this day. Student exchange and educational connectedness are a key part of our diplomacy, and we must work to preserve these ties. At Penn, even as there are challenges in the US-China relationship, we are more committed now than ever to studying China, teaching about China, and welcoming Chinese students at Penn. My office, Penn Global, plays a significant role in providing resources and support to students from all over the world, but in particular, of course, to Chinese students who make up such a significant portion of our international student community. It hasn't been an easy time for the US-China relationship, and it hasn't been an easy time for Chinese students. But even in recent months, as the situation has gotten more challenging, the university has remained steadfast in its commitment. And I'll read to you a statement from Dr. Amy Gutman. I like to call her the other Amy G, from Dr. Amy Gutman from June 23rd. Over the course of our history, since our first Chinese student enrolled in 1896, Chinese students, staff, postdocs, and faculty members have been essential to our world learning, research, and education. They will always be valued members of our community, and we are determined to do everything we can to continue to welcome scholars and students from China, as well as from the entire international community. So even as you hear about the changes and vicissitudes in our relationship, keep those words in mind. Chinese scholars will always be valued members of our community, and we are determined to do everything we can to welcome them. International student mobility is one of our core values at Penn and central to our mission. It's not just nice to have, it is essential. And we will continue to champion it at every turn and advocate to ensure that the best and the brightest from China and around the world continue to choose Penn. Finally, I have to end when Dean Kumar invited me to speak to you all tonight. He said, you know, it would be really nice if you could speak a little bit of Chinese too. 所以我应该用中文说这句话。宾达关心我们中国来的学生，我希望我们最近有机会在费城或者在北京见面。再见。Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Amy, VJ, thank you so much for that great overview of Penn Engineering and all the exciting things happening with Penn and our alums and students from Asia. I want to encourage everybody, if you have questions throughout the program, please use the Q&A feature, and you could submit your question for any presenter or panelist, and we'll do our best to address those questions today. Now, without any further ado, we have a very special presentation by some of Penn Engineering's top faculty. With us today, we have Senior Associate Dean Dave Meany. Dave is the Solomon R. Pollack Professor in Bioengineering. We also have Professor Jing Li, the Eduardo D. Glant Faculty Fellow and Associate Professor in Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. We have Jianbo Shi, Computer Science Professor, and Xu Yang, a professor with appointments in Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering, as well as Material Science. To moderate our panel, we are very pleased to have Professor Boon-Tao Lu, RCA Professor of Computer Science and Associate Dean for Graduate Programs. Boon, let me turn things over to you.
Thank you very much, Brad. And it's great to see everyone here today. And we'll kick this off with Professor Dave Meany, who's going to start the presentation. Each faculty will present for about 7 minutes, and we really want this to be as interactive as possible. So while presenting, please feel free to type in any Q&A question that you have, and we'll be happy to answer them during the panel. Or I'm going to hand it over to Dave right now.
Boon, thank you very much, and good morning to everyone in East Asia. I'm delighted to be here to talk to you about really the past several months as COVID has gripped the United States. And in particular, what I want to talk to you about is what we've been doing here at Penn as part of responding to the early stages of the pandemic, and then the research that is coming out very recently towards addressing some of the later stages of the pandemic, and in particular, controlling the pandemic. I'm going to talk about several highlights, but please know that this is just a snapshot of what's going on throughout the school. And what I really want to emphasize is everything that I'm going to tell you here, students played a critical role in this. It's very much part of our DNA, if you will, that we involve students at every turn. And more nowadays, these ideas not only become prototypes, but in some instances, they become commercialized products. And I'm going to talk to you about some of that. So one of the things that we first started out addressing, and this was no secret when we learned the value of wearing face masks as a way of not just protecting ourselves, but more importantly, others in the phase of the pandemic, is we had a shortage of these. We were getting calls from clinicians that were working in the emergency room. They were not using the right masks simply because they didn't have them. And what you see here are the faculty that really rose up to the challenge, one of whom you'll hear from later, that really did a number of innovative strategies, and I would say innovation with a capital I. What you see here is a customized design that was coming out of Xu Yang's lab, which created a very high quality face mask that could be printed and could be stamped on any fabric, any material whatsoever, and could be produced in mass quantity. And this was done in collaboration with people in the GRASP lab, in particular Mark Yim and Charity. And what happened here was not just the creation of these face masks, but in parallel, we had a number of volunteers working with designs that were created in particular by Mark to create a large volume of face shields that help protect the healthcare workers in the early stages of the pandemic. We had a number of volunteers working in a very short period of time. So we went from idea to prototype to product literally within days. And in the end, we supplied nearly 20,000 face shields to healthcare workers. And importantly, these are now in use even today. They were distributed in April, and now they're in use by healthcare workers today and going forward. But that's not the only thing that emerged in the early stages of the pandemic. The other thing, as we learned how to treat these patients, is that we realized that there was an emerging need to provide alternative technologies for standard ventilators. Ventilators, as people progress and have some of the more severe symptoms of COVID-19, patients were put on ventilators. Ventilators came in short supply. And one of the challenges that came up, learning in part from our colleagues over in Europe, was how to create ventilator type assist technologies, but not using ventilators themselves. And what you see here is the product of work by Jim Weimer in computer science and his colleagues. And really what they did was they repurposed some existing medical equipment. They created a customized design. So what they could do is create a technology that would allow a patient to receive the right amounts of oxygen at the right rates using the hospital supply of gases rather than being connected to a ventilator machine. It now progressed over the course of a couple of weeks into a substitute ventilator technology that again could be used to deploy and to care for more patients over time. And in this instance, as well as in the previous example of face masks and face shields, students were there along the way in prototyping these designs and making them happen. Once we had a supply of face masks, again, Mark Yim's group, and this particular was a collaboration between a mechanical engineering student and an MD or a medical student in the Perelman School of Medicine. They developed a technology that would allow one to re-sterilize a mask using ultraviolet light, and to do it in a way and using technology that was accessible to people in both the developing and the developed world. What you see here is a prototype, again, going through several different prototypes over the course of a couple of months. This is actually a usable product. It's won a number of World Health grants, in particular the Clinton Global Initiatives grant. It's been featured. And this is not the end all of our technology. What we now are creating is a new technology that uses saliva as the fluid to interrogate. And what we're doing, of course, is trying to interrogate if there's any viral particles in the saliva. This is using a technique that is not a common technique for diagnostics for COVID. And in particular, what we're looking at is the binding of the virus to a protein, its natural protein, and the change in resistance that occurs when that binding occurs. This is a very sensitive technique. The advantage of this technique, and the key to this invention, is that you can go from preparing the sample to reading out whether it's positive or negative for virus in about 5 minutes. This is now under review, and we think that this has high commercial application because it really will move testing, not just a point of care, but also point of need in terms of time. You can get an answer within minutes as opposed to waiting hours or days. And this is quite exciting, and this has been done with collaboration among 2 graduate students. And then finally, we realize that once we have infections, and this is well known, we need to understand the circumstances in which these infections occurred and how the spread of the virus may be stopped by doing this contact tracing. And we have someone in computer science that's investigating algorithms that protect both the privacy of the information that's associated with individuals and their path, but also importantly, linking this to the past of other individuals using this technology. And I won't get into the details here because of time, but a lot of this was born from the knowledge that was created from Penn about this area called differential privacy. And using the tools of differential privacy as it applies to these algorithms, we have people working on a digital contact tracing that will allow people to get notifications if they've been at risk of exposure to help protect both themselves and others. I want to highlight a few things. I said this at the beginning. Every example that I showed you, students and trainees were critical. They were the critical linchpins. They were the people creating the ideas, executing on the ideas. And in some cases, these ideas went from idea to product and now to commercialization. And we think that's very exciting. We think that's part of who we are as an engineering school. And then because Penn has this compact campus, especially with COVID-related research, we were not in shortage of clinical supplies. We were not in shortage of clinical expertise, and we could go to people across the street in the hospital and learn what are the important unmet clinical needs that demanded a technological solution. And you've seen some of these today. And I can't emphasize this last point enough. In many times in engineering, perfect is the enemy of good. That is, you wait for the exact, perfect, elegant solution rather than accepting the good solution that works. And in this pandemic, it has forced us time and time again to accept the good that works. And the consequence, the positive consequence of that is that we had ideas moving to patients and people within the span of weeks. And I think this is quite exciting. And again, this is part of our local response on campus to some of the early and later stages of the pandemic. So I know in the interest of time that I'll need to move on, but I'm certainly happy to take any questions as they appear.
Thank you, Professor Meany. If any one of you have questions, please feel free to type it into the chat box, and I'll be happy to repeat the question. And so we have as our next faculty speaker, Professor Jing Li, and let her take it from here.
You'll have to unmute your mic.
Oh, okay, great. Okay. Thanks, Bowen, for the introduction and good morning. My name is Jing Li. I was born and raised in China, and it's really a great pleasure to be here. Since I remember 15 years ago, I was one of the exchange students coming to the US and benefited greatly from the US and China relationship. So it's in the next few minutes, it's my great pleasure to share my research with you, what we do, why we are doing that, and what we have accomplished so far. So here are some highlights of my past research. We are generally interested in workload optimized systems. Systems that people require extremely high performance or efficiency, such as the ones used in finance, in those Wall Street bankers for things like high-speed trading or supercomputer used to tackle the grand scientific challenges. So one of my interests is a machine learning system. Apply machine learning to drive more intelligent computer systems, which in turn can be used to drive more powerful machine learning model. And we have a new research community called Machine Learning Systems formed just last year with a very strong industry support. So with this AI for system driving better system for AI, people always thought we are building a Terminator, Skynet type of machine. So our research has been largely driven by the following four trends. The first trend is recognizing the growing hardware-software deficit. And this the famous chart that AI people used to illustrate the computation requirement to train the state-of-the-art deep learning model over time. 35x every 18 months. For a big part of our history, we largely rely on letting the hardware allow us to scale in terms of computational demands that we have. And this is pretty much bounded by the Moore's law. If we double the amount of computation, we just get faster processors. However, the growth in hardware cannot keep up with the computational demands of applications, especially in the era of AI and big data. In addition to CPU, GPU, there are many PUs out there. So as you can see, in recent years, there has been an intense competition in develop AI chips across industry. Not just the tech giant Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, and also the cloud vendors from China, Ali, and so on. But also traditional IC vendors like Intel, NVIDIA, numerous startups all over the world. So the second trend is that for many applications in today's data center, we are packing more and more hardware physically in a single box. What used to be close to a full rack in 10 years ago now fit into a 4U rack in many data centers, a single box. So the key challenge is how we can use this dense box efficiently. So one of the big aspects in academic and industry, both in deployment and research, is that people are very heavily focused on scale out. That they are not looking at, are we scaling in well to explore the amount of hardware parallelism that we can see in this single box. And in our opinion, we need both. So the third trend is a significantly increased complexity for designing computer systems for various purposes. The data scientists and machine learning researchers and practitioners has been playing a catch-up game to the changes made by the hardware architects. Whenever there is a change on hardware, they will modify their algorithms, rewrite their kernel implementations. Looking into the future with a significantly increased design space in hardware and software, this game of waiting for architects to give new hardware feature and then machine learning folks reacting to it is no longer sustainable anymore. Since architecture is now at a crucial point where radically different architecture are now being invented, as we show in the previous chart. So this is a chicken egg problem. Finally, the last trend is about the semiconductor industry. The ineffectiveness on CMOS scaling forces us to look into beyond the solid-state physics to explore new computing opportunities. New electrical, mechanical, optical, bio devices, quantum devices, and so on. So to address these challenges, we structure our research into two directions. From the top down, we introduce a concept called data-driven hardware-friendly algorithm. We aim to design algorithm to count for both the characteristics of the data and the features of the underlying hardware, so that by design, it will be efficient when deploying in a real system. And we focus on information retrieval, graph analytics, and machine learning. From bottom up, to support efficient data processing, we rethink computer system design with data as a first-class citizen and develop methodologies for both scale-in and scale-out systems. We show a synergetic and collaborative way of optimizing algorithm, software, and hardware can achieve significant improvement over state-of-art industry solutions. And finally, in addition to systems optimized for machine learning, we also apply machine learning to further improve systems which can help develop more powerful machine learning models to form the positive feedback loop as we showed before. So finally, I would like to highlight some of our past achievements. Between machine and human, and there are 5 orders of magnitude efficiency gap. So how do we get there? The first milestone is a demonstration of a supercomputer node that we designed for graph processing. It is ranked #1 among the supercomputer nodes worldwide, and IBM was the second place. The second milestone is a demonstration of the most performant deep learning accelerators. According to the chief architect of Brainwave from Microsoft, we set the world's record, and we have been holding this record. The third milestone is a demonstration of the first low-latency billion-scale search system that will achieve 10x better performance than state-of-the-art industry solution from Facebook. Finally, looking 10 years ahead, we also worked on more aggressive solutions and explore new physics to do computing, a project called Liquid Silicon supported by DARPA. We demonstrated the first non-conventional post-silicon chip for general-purpose computing with full system support, achieving computing efficiency closer to human brain. I think that's the last one, and thank you. 谢谢.
Thank you, Professor Jingli. As our next speaker, we have Professor Jianbo Shi, who will, I think.
Okay, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, let me set up a camera. Just a second. I think the other screen share need to be stopped, I think. Okay, cool. Is my screen sharing working?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, 大家早上好。Yeah, 非常高兴这次能够在远程跟大家一块见面。I just speak my Chinese. Yeah. So, I want to thank VJ and Boom and Amy and Dave for organizing this panel. I think it's incredibly indicating how much effort Penn is putting onto Chinese students. It's a difficult year, I think. And I think a lot of Chinese students here are working hard on both sides to make this semester successful. I have many students also learning in China, so I appreciate the effort every day to get up and take my classes. So today, actually, I just want to talk about a few things about my own research. I work on computer vision, and I think Jing mentioned, AI is demanding a lot of computing power. We are very guilty of that. We keep asking more computing power, and sometimes the amount of computing we are needing is probably going to take the electricity from a small city. And this is all because I think we're very lucky in a time where I think technology is moving extremely fast. Only once in a lifetime, I think one can hope for this type of technology breakthrough called deep learning. The performance of AI is really have kept up the pace the last few years. People said it's going to stop, but they keep going. And some of my research is really building on some of those efforts here. So what is we're going to talk about today is really about first-person vision, and this is something I really find extremely exciting. And this is about putting a camera on top of your head. So here we saw actually a video footage of a basketball game playing actually in China by my previous visitors coming to my lab, and she actually went back to China and taped this video for me of people wearing a first-person camera and playing basketball. From the video footage we saw just earlier, we can see that people can actually estimate their own body position in the court and orientation and so on, as if they have a virtual GPS on their head. From this, we are trying to learn how humans interact with each other, not just looking out into the video, but try to guess what people are thinking and model their mental state. One of the things we've done is future prediction. So for example, we have videotape of many hours of people playing video together. We have three-dimensional estimation of their core position, from which we then can predict how the person gonna run. So here we have a point on the court that we can self-estimate, and this is the trajectory that we predict. We also can predict where the person gonna look. And so this is an overhead view, and you can see in the first person view, we also plot out the trajectory that you will run into the court and which direction it will look. Furthermore, we have something called a social attention, which is modeling how people are interacting together. So this is a fairly early stage research. What we hope to do eventually is having a robot that can interact with human, anticipate how human can do things and where they're going to pay attention to, so that the robot can collaboratively work with a team of people or a team of other robots. And this is crucial because, as we saw, technology is really advancing quickly, both in US and China. If you've been to Shenzhen, I guess many of you might be from Shenzhen itself, you'll see many robot projects are taking place in China. What we hope is that then the robots can work with human side by side and by reading sort of mind states of the human in the team. So that's one of the projects that we're working on. And going a little bit deeper into the system, that we basically focus on three things about first person. One is called attention. And this is also motivates some of the experience I had working with some of my colleagues in China, where I was in a mental hospital trying to look at depression issues of patients. They're studying essentially the attention of people, and they're using the gaze tracking devices, looking at your eyes and try to track your gaze and try to estimate from that eye movements your mental depression state. So finding a 3D device that track your eye movements is pretty expensive. Finding a device that can track your eye movements in 3D is even more expensive. So those devices are not available. So we're thinking about how we can actually using a wearable camera that's just mounted to your head and trying to learn using AI, what are you paying attention to? What are you looking at? So it turns out we are always looking at things, for example, mirrors and computers on which we work. But sometimes we're also looking at our hand as we start interacting with objects. So we collect a lot of data and we try to build up AI system that can look at your camera footage coming from the top of your head without having expensive eye tracking device estimate those gaze intentions. So it's a fairly ambitious project, but we hope to get somewhere. To help the problem to become more feasible, we also build a stereo devices that can actually estimate three-dimensional scene layout of the environment. So that makes the problem easier. Long story short, we have built a prototype allowed us to take in footage and directly estimate those hotspots. Those hotspots might be objects, might be your hands or things you are looking or things you're touching. And those are the results of our algorithm. We also have extended algorithm to footage of not human subjects, but in this case from a dog. Animals also have lots of attention, but they cannot talk. So we were trying to see if there's a footage coming from an animal, can we directly estimate from that footage what animals are thinking or what they're paying attention to. One of a colleague, I think at Penn, of a faculty in veterinary school, actually put cameras on pigs, and then he's studying pig-to-pig social interaction because when pigs get stressed out, they don't grow. So this is actually a pretty practical problem to be solved. We're also looking at not just basketball predictions of how people are playing basketball. People are interested in self-driving in China. Here, I joke about this is actually self-walking. So if you're walking in the street and you're checking your cell phone, the system will navigate you, tell you where to go and where to walk and not to trip over things. So this is a sort of a self-walking project. We, again, have a camera on the head of the students. I walked around and took lots of footage. From this, we extracted three-dimensional shapes and environments, and we learn how we walk into the scene. So given a picture, the system learns on its own. So I won't talk about the details about here. It learns that at the street corners, either you take a right turn, or in this case, my student tend to jaywalk a lot. He cut the corner quite often, and it shows that this kind of tendency to jaywalk. You see the prediction going straight or across the street, or you walk into somebody's home, or in this case, actually there's a gap between two cars, and he's walking across them. So you can think this is self-walking, and it could be helping for a blind person. A aiding them in a cluttered environment. Indoor is very difficult. One of the long-standing problem in robotics is finding those negative obstacles. For example, a stair that go down or an exit they cannot see. Again, AI system can look at context from a past experience, figure out how you actually can exit a building or where you could find possible places to go. And finally, we're very interested in also essentially what I call embodied curiosity. This is a robot that learns from human behavior to be curious in terms of how to do things in controlled fashion. That's far difficult for a human to teach. So this is about sports. For example, can we learn from a video, a footage of people biking, learn how to bike? So obviously we all know how to bike. Some of us maybe don't, but most of us know how to bike. But imagine you have a sports that we don't know how to do. Can we just take the footage and analyze the exact motion of the human in 3D here? But not only that, to figure out exactly what the human subject is doing. So for example, he's turning the steering wheel, he's climbing. So this red button here indicating he's accelerating or is a decelerator. And we all do this without actually having a gyroscope on your body, just looking at the footage yourself. So the other day I was talking to my students, he was showing me that he is doing this ice skating beautifully. I said, where do you learn this? Oh, I say, many hours of YouTube videos. So obviously a human does it. And the question is, can we take that footage and again, translate to a robot? So this is allowed a robot to not only learn from a physical device, but this is from a human subject just doing it day in, day out, and learn from human when to accelerate, when to brake, when to turn. So I will show you a little bit more. Skiing is very difficult. I know Winter Olympic is coming to Beijing, and I hope it happens. And skiing is a fun sport, but it's not easy to learn. I myself have looked at many YouTube videos, but this you can think of as learning aids for you to A, to learn how to ski, but B, maybe to analyze your own footage and telling you exactly how you're doing in terms of your acceleration and deceleration from just the footage itself. This last video, I don't recommend people to do it. And this is jumping off the sky and diving to the ground. Eventually you can see the speed go up to a speed of 100 meters per second. So that's just a little bit too fast, a little bit too dangerous. So in summary, I think technology is moving really fast, and it's a really, I think, effort requires many people working together. AI prides itself in to be open. We have most algorithms are open on open platforms. Definitely echo what Vijay said, that I hope the collaboration continues and can keep the door open for both sides. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Xu. And we'll now hand it over to Professor Xu Yang, who'll be presenting as our fourth panelist.
All right, so I'm Xu Yang, and I'd like to first thank Vijay, Amy, Brad, and Boone, as well as Dave, for this opportunity to talk to you. Good morning. And I want to show you some of my work. My research is mostly programming materials with intelligence and the relevance. So I want to emphasize the relevance of this our research. So let's first, let me introduce myself. So I'm a professor in material science engineering, but also have a secondary appointment in the chemical and biomolecular engineering. In the meantime, I'm in the graduate group of such as physics and astronomy, electrical and system engineering, and also work very closely with mechanical engineers and bioengineers. So prior to come to Penn, I was a member of technical staff at Bell Laboratories. Now it's called the Alcatel-Lucent Technologies. So my research is work on a variety of different kinds of soft and bio-inspired materials, which is including polymers, biomaterials, gels, colloids, liquid crystal, amphiphils, and composites. So these looks like very big names, but indeed, these are actually very common materials we use in our daily life. So particularly, during the pandemic, we have to use a lot of polymers as protecting materials, devices. So polymers are very present in everywhere our daily life. So having working on these kind of material, the question is, how do we deal with these material, right? The soft materials. And how do we make them intelligent and relevant? So first, I like to show what is the typical key questions when my students come over, we want to ask them to think about. So first, we like to ask, what kind of problems do we want to solve? And whether these problems we're solving have any societal impact and scientific impact. So these scientific impact and societal impact are hand in hand. We need to address both of them. So having this concept, key question we ask about, the next question is, what can we do as a material scientists, engineers? So what kind of solution can we apply from our fundamental knowledge to solve these kind of problems? And one is addressing the scientific impact. On the other hand, we want to have a societal impact. So typically our strategy is we look at what kind of potential application we're trying to address, what kind of performance we want to achieve. And having this in mind, we'll go back to look at what kind of physical properties, unique physical properties we want to tailor. And next question is, how do we design the material? How do we process them? And then how we characterize them. So as you can see here, although we are, as material scientists, we're looking at the bigger picture to try to address fundamental science and applied science. And so it's very, very important to think about what are the solution we provided are novel. And the second is very, very important to my heart is, are they relevant? Right? Are they relevant to our society? So this requires us to be open-minded and also very collaborative, because you cannot solve all the problems. So we need to bring people together to address the problems and work as a team. So what kind of things we're interested in? So we're interested in engineering functional devices from nanoscale to macro scale. So we go from molecular level to synthesize molecules, design of molecules, but our interest is not focusing just nano, because if you want to use them, you have to go to macro scale, to the human scale. So we're interested in understanding fundamental science and applying them, engineering them to go to devices. And particularly, I'm interested in different kinds of robotics, and particularly is the soft robotics medium with the hard materials and hard components. And we're also interested in connected intelligent devices, particularly is medical devices. And we're also interested in putting them into wearable, different kinds of wearable devices. And we're also interested in not only from, as I mentioned, from nanoscale to micro scale to macro scale. Really, if you wear these devices, eventually, as we know, a human being have a society, we have a building, and we have interaction with each other. So my interest is taking this from macro scale and eventually to the building scale, and to consider at the system level how we interact with each other. To do this, a lot of things we're actually going back to look at how nature teaches us. So Mother Nature is an incredible material scientist, all right? As you can see here, there's many, many beautiful images we learn from the nature, and they provide, for example, super slippery surfaces, or they can have very strong and reversible adhesion. They can change color. You can have beautiful color coming from butterflies or flowers, or they can change color, or they can actually be very mobile, such as squirrel can jump very high and climb, and all these different kinds of locomotion can happen at the same time. So our interest is, can we learn from the nature and then make new materials, new devices, develop new algorithm, and create a new manufacturing process? So not only trying to understand fundamental science, but also make all these materials, devices to be sustainable, scalable, and high performance. So here I want to show you several examples in my lab. We emphasize materials innovation. So we work on a variety of materials, and typically soft materials, as I mentioned earlier. But we also develop new algorithms such as origami and kirigami. We also integrate a variety of different kinds of manufacturing techniques, whether it's self-assembly, whether it's photolithography, whether it's additive manufacturing using 3D or 4D printing. And with that, we're also interested in how we apply these materials for a variety of novel applications. So from smart windows, sensors, oil water separation membranes, smart fabric, all right, to a variety of biomedical uses, for example, tough gels, wearable devices, to the building energy, how to make the energy efficient in the building, and the robotics. All right. So last, I want to emphasize everything we do has to be relevant. All right. As a material scientist, I think that's a very important mission to me, is to be relevant to the society. So during the pandemic, that's why we feel the urge to work together with medical doctors and nurses and healthcare people. And particularly what's dear to my heart is this mask, because at that time in the March time frame, there's a lot of shortage in the face mask. So we use the old technology, which is origami, right? Using the origami, how do we make the mask to be conformable to the face using medical material? And so as you can see here, we design origami structures. So we work with the local industry medical device companies, and we deliver more than 10,000 masks to the Penn Medicine. So having achieved that, the next question is, what is the material? Can we make better materials, not just using some of the material which is disposable, right? Because a lot of things, question is, if you use disposable material, it causes a lot of, for example, environmental issue and its comfortness. So we started looking to functional material. Not only they function as a filter, but also very important, how comfortable they are, whether they're water repelling, which means repelling all these aerosols, whether we can make the fabric breathable. Further, we take another step further to work with dental medicine, is to look at whether we can individually tailor the designs in 3D printing. Because as you can imagine, the dental doctors, they deal with aerosols, deal with the patient on a daily basis. So the protection is very, very important. So if they wear the mask, and if the mask is very tight and they have to wear 8 hours, it's causing a lot of skin infection. So we want to minimize the weight, at the same time, make sure they have very good conformal and tightness onto the face to minimize any kinds of potential leakage. So we started to design a variety of the 3D printing geometry and testing materials. So tailor this for individually personalized face mask. So with that, I will stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Shu, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our great faculty for that really compelling look at all of the research that's going on at Penn Engineering. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to the conversation 2 really extraordinary Penn alums. The first is Goodwin Gaw. Goodwin is a 1991 graduate of the Management and Technology dual degree program between Engineering and Wharton. Goodwin is the founder and managing principal of Gaw Capital Partners, a uniquely positioned real estate private equity fund management company that focuses on markets in Greater China and others with high barriers of entry. Goodwin is also a member of the Board of Advisors for Penn Engineering. Welcome to you, Goodwin. We also have joining us Robin Ren, and Robin is a 1995 graduate of Penn with a dual degree in engineering in the college. Robin is also a proud parent of a class of 2024 student. And among Robin's many, many accomplishments, he has worked at Tesla from 2015 to 2020, where he held various leadership positions, including Vice President of Asia Pacific, Vice President of Worldwide Sales, and Vice President of Business Development. So welcome to you, Robin. And now, Vijay, I'd like to invite you to engage our alums in a little dialogue. So please take it away.
Thank you, Brad. Goodwin, Robin, I'm delighted you can join us. Welcome. To members of the audience, I just want to tell you that my role is simply to ask a few warm-up questions to our distinguished panelists. We want you to ask them the really hard questions, which I'll moderate. So please use the Q&A box to ask your questions, and I will choose from those questions and direct them to our panelists. Goodwin, allow me to start with you. So one of the things that Brad did not mention in his introduction is that you started off as a civil engineer at Penn. And of course, we don't have the civil engineering program anymore at Penn. Tell us a little bit about why civil engineering, and then what happened when after you graduated? Tell us about the journey you took after you left Penn.
Sure, Vijay. Thank you for having me. Yes, I did start in civil engineering. I've always grew up always wanting to build things. I always like structures, buildings, real estate. So I thought civil engineering would give me the building blocks to understand how things are built, to understand what's possible. And so I went that journey, and then obviously at Penn, because of the variety of optionality afforded to every student at Penn, I looked at it as I'm not very good at humanities. So maybe I'll fill my humanities requirement by going into M&T and fill those with Wharton classes, which is much easier for me versus humanities, but definitely engineering centric. But I wanted to understand how things are built. And then obviously the great Penn education that gave me and the connections and the network sort of lead me to, and with the education on the business school side, led me to work for a firm in Southern California to essentially get into the real estate world. And then which actually then took me to acquire a historical hotel that was down on its knee, a bankrupt hotel in Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel in Los Angeles, which was interesting. I looked at it, I walked the hotel, it's bankrupt, but it used to host the Academy Awards #1 in 1928. So obviously people would say that's obsolete, it's too old, it's outdated structure, on and on. But somehow walking that historical hotel gave me a feeling that the hotel still have a soul. And that soul of that hotel sort of told me or led me to help revive it into sort of a fallen icon, into something popular again with the younger population then. And with that experience, so I sort of focus on how to revitalize many of these older buildings, whether it's an old building in Nanjing Donglu in Shanghai, to buildings in Berlin, to London, where I thought the ability to sort of see beyond what's in front of you and then to see what it can become again without tearing these buildings down and sending them to the landfill was sort of become our motto on a forte, and something that we feel pretty good at doing. And my engineering background in Penn always gave me, I was going to a lot of these meetings with my project manager and my contractors, talking a few keywords here and there. So I know not enough to do that job, but enough to be dangerous and enough to trick them into thinking I know what I'm talking about. So they can't just try to walk over me or talk over me.
Very good. I did not know about the M&T to Hollywood story, but that's a great story. Robin, let me also share something that was not in your bio. You're also a classical musician. And so I'm trying to figure out what kind of DNA you have with it, allowing you to pursue a degree in physics and in electrical engineering while specializing in classical music. Tell me a little bit about, again, at Penn, how you made the decisions, what degrees to pursue, and then what career alternatives did you explore before you ended up where you are?
Yeah, thank you, Vijay. I think, in schools and in many parts of our life, we artificially divide different disciplines into departments, into programs, arts and sciences, engineering. I always view them as part of, education and part of our life. As I said, I always loved classical music, and this actually helps me as an engineer growing up as a science student. When I was in Philadelphia, when I was attending Penn as an undergrad student, I remember I would often walk because I didn't have a car. Walk to the center city, to Academy of Music to attend live performances of Philadelphia Orchestra, one of my favorite orchestras in the world. There's always something magical about being an engineer and also loving arts at the same time. I think they help each other, they really do.
Thank you for that. Let me, if I can just follow up. So going further along, you've sort of seen innovation both in the U.S. and in China. I don't know, Robin, if you'd be willing to sort of compare the ecosystem that you've experienced in California and also in Hong Kong and in China.
Yeah, I think, all these places are great centers of innovation. I've, obviously lived in California for the last 25 years since I graduating from Penn in 95. But also my work in the last 15 years, I would say, took me to many places in Asia. I spent a lot of time in China, Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Taiwan. And I always feel like the amount of energy, the amount of upward movement of people in focus in education, focusing on creating a better future in all these places, as well as Silicon Valley, I think contributed to the great amount of innovations coming out of these places. I always have this thing called immigration bias, or immigrant bias, I should say. Any place that attracts a lot of immigrants, people, whether it's domestic immigrants or international immigrants, any place that attracts a lot of people from other places, they are self-selected to be successful, because the fact that they actually took the pain and took the effort to travel a long distance. A lot of times they left their hometown, they left their families behind, go to a new city, go to a new country, start a new life. These are the people more wanting to be successful. And this is what you see in places like Hong Kong, in places like Shenzhen, definitely in Beijing and Shanghai, in Silicon Valley, all of these places.
That's a great way to characterize the energy of an ecosystem by thinking about immigration, whether domestic or international. That's a great point. Goodwin, I wonder if you could take the same question again, thinking about the innovation ecosystem both in the U.S. and in China and Hong Kong. Any thoughts, any comparisons? How would you compare the two environments?
I think in particular, right, I think one thing many countries around the world has tried to replace the ecosystem of Silicon Valley, because Silicon Valley, the ecosystem comes from the schools, or US for that matter, comes from the schools to then venture capitalists ready with their checkbook to actually fund ideas coming out of the top students or researchers from the schools, that eventually then the top talent will actually help commercialize the ideas. The right CEOs will commercialize the product into ideas, into products that actually become successful products. Right? In China, I think this is also developing. As you look at the Chinese government with their long-term view of developing the Greater Bay Area, where they actually, the Greater Bay Area is actually stitching together Shenzhen, which is a software hub, to Guangzhou, which is a manufacturing hub, to Hong Kong, which is a finance and management hub. But they actually stitch that together first and foremost with all the infrastructure. You look at these massive civil engineering projects of the bridges to the high-speed trains that connect this region. So all the infrastructure is actually ready to allow this GBA, as we call it, region to be stitched together to connect all this talent. And Robin is absolutely right. Even in Hong Kong, we're increasingly seeing, obviously we have our fair share of issues about the social unrest, about some of the younger generation thinking their jobs are taken away by the harder working immigrants from China. But at the same time, that harder working immigrants with even better attitude, more drive, more desire to work hard to be successful is actually pushing the Hong Kong youth to say, hey, so the more driven Hong Kong youth saying we actually have to shape up because this is real competition, but the opportunities also across the border where we can actually go to Shenzhen and Guangzhou to pursue opportunities also. So I do think given time, obviously we're in a little bit of a flux, a little bit of a conflict, as in many parts of the world, but that's coming, and technology is a big part of it. If you spend, I mean, Vijay, I know you spend time in China. I'm always fascinated. I remember vividly about a year and a half ago, we take our senior management team around the world once a year on a trip. And this time I took a big chunk of my Shanghai, Beijing office to US to do a visit, LA office, our San Francisco office. They were all saying, why does it seem so technologically behind coming from China to US? And what they're talking about, the convenience of our daily lives in China, right? Where everything is done by your phone. You take out a phone, you go to a restaurant, you scan a QR code, you order from a virtual menu, and the order is tabulated that you are all paying for yourself without seeing a piece of paper, without signing a credit card, and just walking out after the food is delivered and eaten, and you go out and the bill is split among you, right? All the electronic payments, virtual currency, to daily app. So all those technological advances is all built on the backbone of innovation from the US, but maybe commercialized in a more usable manner. But it seemed like that's actually starting to take it to where China, because of the availability of data, because people, in a way, the cynic will say, people are not worried about data privacy. That's why the data is so available. But at the same time, the consumers in China are saying, I don't mind giving up my data if I'm getting a better product, right? At least that's what I'm getting from my younger staff. And so in the race for machine learning, in the race for AI, where data, availability of data is the new fuel, that could actually create some healthy competition. Maybe if you put the politics aside, to see if the US data scientists actually could move that curve up, and US may have to compete.
So if I can just follow up, so are you suggesting that social norms are different in China than in US as far as privacy is concerned? Or is it just that in China, people are inclined to be more pragmatic, saying, yes, if I give up privacy to this extent, I'm going to get this amount of convenience and this amount of enhancement to the products that I can buy?
Well, I mean, I live in Hong Kong, right? So I may not be the perfect person to answer this question, but my own observation, having spending a lot of time in China, doing a fair bit of business in China, my view is that in China, I think at least for my staff, when I talk to them, they feel they're getting freedom, bits and bits and bits, right? They feel they came from a lower base of freedom and daily life getting better. Everything is getting a bit better. So they're much more willing to live with the incremental opening up versus if I compare that to Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, some of the younger generation are complaining because they feel that freedom is taking a little bit away because it's being integrated into China. But in China, they do feel that there's more and more freedom daily, and what they're giving up seems to be I wouldn't say a good price to pay, but what they're giving up, it's sort of, they get something in return that's actually making the society better and making life better. And that's also seemed to be the directive of the government to how to improve the quality of life bit by bit on a daily basis.
Good, thank you. Let me ask something along the same lines to you, Robin. So as you think about technologies and commercialization, and think between the US and China, and if you ask what technologies are China more likely to commercialize, one obvious thing to me, which is happening today, is the electric car industry, and of course batteries, and you are the expert there. So what do you think? I mean, what's the future of companies like Tesla versus the different startups you have in all over China?
Yeah, I think really we are coming to an incredibly exciting time for sustainable transportation and sustainable energy. I think in this new field, both China and the US being the number one and number two leaders in energy consumption and number of cars, I think these two countries and these two economies can play a huge role in transitioning the world to a more sustainable way of consuming energy and moving around. Luckily, I think there are lots of innovations happening. Obviously, there are a lot of very innovative companies focusing on electric vehicles, making electric cars, mobility in China. Obviously Tesla is, working very hard in many places, many markets. Also, I think electric vehicle is only part of the equation. Solving sustainable transport only can go so far if you do not have a sustainable way of producing the energy. One question I always get asked by consumers or car buyers of Tesla cars, they love Tesla cars. It's a fancy, very fast and very innovative, very easy to use. But the question is, where does electricity come from, right? If the electricity is coming from coal or coming from natural gas, then obviously what you're doing, it's still meaningful. You're moving the emission from millions of tailpipes and move them to a more manageable power station where the emission can be cut and optimized and reduced. That's still meaningful. However, there's no denying there is still emission at the power plant. However, the real way to transition the entire world to more sustainable energy is to generate the energy in a sustainable way in the first place. I think both China and the US can lead the way in innovation, especially in engineering and material science, in finding ways to generate energy sustainably, more cheaply, store them, because obviously sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day. The wind doesn't always blow summer or winter. So you need to generate a lot of energy and store them to use them later. So I think there are a lot of technological challenges in this field, and it's incredibly exciting. This is where I think a lot of the engineering students in both places can work very hard and try to solve those problems.
Excellent, excellent. I mean, that's very insightful. Thank you. Let me go to the chat box and the Q&A box for some very interesting questions. So the first one is something that I wonder a lot about. So given the current Sino-US relations in the short run or the long run, do you think technology, specifically computer science, is likely to sparkle cooperation between the two countries, or do you think it'll be a competition which will result in more hostility? So right now there is definitely competition, but some of it is artificial. I think it's imposed by the governments. But what if a technologist in the US and a technologist in China want to collaborate? And where do you see this spirit going in the future? Whoever wants to go first.
I'll go first. I think competition is always good. Collaboration is always good too. I was one of the very few undergrad students at Penn in the early 90s who came directly from China. So I have a kind of a unique and personal perspective on how things have changed in both places, in both countries. I tend to take a very long-term view of things. I am fundamentally an optimist. I think things will work out. A lot of the challenges that we see, they will be solved by wise and smart leaders in both countries. I always believe that more exchange in people and ideas, as long as it's done in a mutually respect way, with mutual respect, with mutual understanding, more exchange of people and ideas will always help in the longer run for both countries and both economies. This is how I view it.
I think this is where academia, right, would be the right platform to help foster that innovation or collaboration, right? Obviously, in more peaceful times, a pandemic like what we're dealing with right now would have actually united the world powers to collaborate with the knowledge to solve the problem together. But I think geopolitics play too big of a hand right now to prevent some of these collaboration to happen. But I do believe academia, by the virtue of the fact that it's non-commercial, it's non-profit, do provide a much better platform for some of these important topics, whether it's energy, right? Maybe one day the human can figure out how to go from nuclear that people are afraid about because of fusion to fission, right? If we can figure out how to go fission one day, that would be the cleanest source of energy, infinite, forever, right? A lot of these big problems do need the best and the brightest from all around the world to collaborate. And academia, I would think, a great education like Penn would be the right platform to help that collaboration. It would cross the political divide and potentially the geopolitical tension also.
It's interesting. I read this article that talked about the number of borders between countries, walls that have been built. And during, just after the Berlin Wall came down, I think there were 4 walls between countries. And now it's something close to 82 or something like that. Wow. So not just the wall that we're supposedly building with Mexico, but to me, the real wall is the flow of information, the flow of ideas. And when that gets built, that is dangerous. So I think the more collaborations you can have and the more you link communities, I think the harder it is that's going to, to build that wall. So I completely agree with you. Another interesting question that I think the two of you are just uniquely qualified to answer. This is about innovation. So universities teach a lot more about knowledge than innovation. So how can innovation be learned? And the follow-up question, I think, Robin, you talked about areas where immigration was encouraged. Should we move to a city known for its innovation? And I might twist this question to ask, well, should we all immigrate to a city where there's a lot of immigration? Your thoughts, Robin, and then Goodwin?
Sure. I don't think Penn, first of all, I don't think Penn needs to move. I think, bright students will come to Penn as they always have in the last 200 plus years. I think, looking back at my education at Penn, I think what it really taught me, because I did a dual degree between engineering and college of arts and sciences. I think what it really taught me was not the technical facts. I studied electrical engineering. The classes that I took, the specific things that I learned, probably already they're out of date. However, what really benefited me over the years are the ways, the specific approaches, the scientific and engineering approaches that led to those facts, the discovery of those facts. And so I learned to apply the engineering and scientific approaches to my everyday work, whether being an engineer, being a manager, being a business executive. I think you always start with those scientific engineering based approaches. I think that is the most important part of my education at Penn.
Goodwin?
I echo with that, right? The engineering background gives you a quantitative way to think, right? How to solve problems, how to look at, because as Boone said, as Robin said, many of the stuff what we learn in school are obsolete already with the way the world is changing. But that curiosity, that quantitative thinking will allow you to apply that to as the world disrupts. And for me, looking back at my own experience, growing up in Hong Kong, studying in Hong Kong, the more traditional Chinese way of teaching is always textbook, teachers telling you what you are supposed to know, and everything is kind of black and white. But the US education do foster a lot more, do push you in more outside the box thinking, to be more innovative from that matter, to question what's real and what's not real, to question what's facts and what's not facts. And in a highly disruptive society or society that's going through accelerated disruption from technology, the US education institution kind of thinking does help you. You can't teach innovation, but does help you think more as an individual, question what's possible, and then push the envelope. And then that basics coupled with a curious mind to eventually those two lead to good innovations, or lead you to be a good innovator. Being fortunate to be in the investment world, to be able to invest with many of these very creative innovators of new age companies in China, we're fortunate to see a lot of these innovations. So I would say it probably can't be taught, but those basic building blocks combined with the right personality, will actually lead to you to become an innovator.
Great thoughts. Thank you. A follow-up, not a follow-up, but this is specifically for you, Goodwin. As somebody who is obviously an expert in real estate and also thinks about technology quite deeply. So the question that's being asked here is, what are the synergies, the potential synergies? And the question is specific to the Bay Area. So if you put those two things together, what are the synergies and what are the opportunities?
Well, it's firstly an innovation hub, right? It's as an investor in real estate that we build, fix, or create, we always look for cities of growth. And Bay Area is where the ecosystem is irreplaceable. And that ecosystem really is the ability to drive talent and ability to attract talent. Because ultimately, all growth companies require talent. So Silicon Valley still, I mean, the Bay Area still has plenty of growth left, because it's not just computer science today. There's biotech, life science, light manufacturing that's coming, because more and more of these companies will be doing prototyping. And San Francisco, for example, has a lot of these light manufacturing buildings that you cannot do anything but light manufacturing. So those will be ideal platform for life science companies, prototyping companies for new innovative material science products, robotics. Multitude of those industries will all congregate in Silicon Valley or Bay Area to actually grow. Of course, eventually when they scale up, they probably will need the larger manufacturing ability across the water to the east. But basically anything and everything, all these growth sectors that require talent will actually congregate in the Bay Area. And ultimately, this question also dovetail into whether we need office space anymore, right? Because people say, as we're doing a Zoom meeting right now, we can all work from home, we can all telecommute essentially. But I always go back to the basics. I say, are you a star athlete in golf or tennis, which is a single person sport? Ultimately, if you are a team sport where you need to collaborate, we need to corroborate, you need to be in a lab working on a project together, you need to have a whiteboard in a room to actually brainstorm. There's nothing better to be live. But then the product, as real estate entrepreneur, we also have to create a product of tomorrow where it has to serve a purpose of fostering creativity. It can't be just, I think the days of boring old office building enclosed with no access to fresh air in a high rise, the commodity space could suffer because of the technological advancement in how we communicate like we're doing today.
Wonderful, thank you. Let me try to wrap up with one last question for Robin. This is about the development of the EV sector in China and the competition that is coming from other Southeast Asian countries, as everybody is trying to corner the EV battery production. So do you believe that Southeast Asia has this edge over China? And I would also love to hear about the same thing with respect to the US.
Yeah. First of all, I don't work for Tesla anymore, so I'm talking completely in my personal capacity, sharing my personal thoughts. So this don't construe this as some kind of official message from Tesla. I think sustainable transportation and sustainable energy are fundamentally people business. In the sense that transportation and also energy generation and consumption are fundamentally tied to people. Wherever there is population, there is increasing need for both sustainable energy and transportation. So if you look at the world population and energy consumption, obviously you see East Asia, Southeast Asia being the big population centers where huge amount of people live in those places, and they need to get around, they need to do it in a more sustainable way and generate, and they are consuming, as their economies grow, they consume more and more energy. So the question is, where do those energies come from? And once you identify these so-called energy consumption centers, then you ask question, where are the business opportunities? Where do those growth come from? China was a very good example. You know, in the 90s and early 2000s, there was not so much attention on sustainability, and there were a lot of issues, environmental issues. Then the leaders took control. They said, we need to do something about it. And then they started with a lot of leading policies. That's hugely important in driving the EV industry growth in the last 10 years. I think in South Asia, Southeastern Asia, we need to see more of that government and policy leadership. I think, you know, technology is already there. In the US, in Europe, in China, we already demonstrated, people have already demonstrated lithium-ion battery works, the electric vehicle works, as long as you have the infrastructure, as long as you have the government, you know, led investment in charging infrastructure and a lot of these things. Once you solve those problems, once you have a leading policy, then people will adopt. I think it's, you know, we need to see more governments stepping forward in showing that they're serious about environment, they're serious about sustainability, and they're serious about creating a better future.
Thank you very much, Robin. Very great answer, and I learned a lot from both of you in this conversation. Before I hand it over to Brad, we're 3 minutes over, so I should hand it over to Brad, but I do want to take this opportunity to thank both you, Goodwin and Robin, for spending this time with us. Thank you very much, and thank you for all the questions that the audience asked us to make this discussion an interesting one. Over to you, Brad.
Thank you. Yes, Vijay, thank you so much. I just want to echo thanks, Goodwin and Robin, for that masterclass in engineering and technology, and really appreciate your thoughts on that. Thanks to Dr. Gadsden, Dean Kumar, Boone, and all of our great faculty members. Thank you so much for coming out today. We really appreciate seeing you. We can't wait to be with you in person again. But thank you for your time and attention tonight. It's been great to be with you. Thank you all, and we hope to see you soon. Good night.